At my sister's wedding, her new husband pointed at me and called me the family disgrace. The room went silent, and my sister didn't defend me. I stayed calm, but inside I felt years of insults rising again. Instead of reacting, I waited until the speeches. When the mic came to me, I thanked everyone for attending and revealed I had paid for the entire wedding, including their honeymoon. The guests stared at him, not me. His face dropped as the truth settled on everyone. My name is Alara Briggs, and I grew up in a small home with my father, Dale Briggs. He raised me alone from the time I was young. Life was never easy for him, yet he moved through every day with calm patience. He never tried to impress anyone or show off. He preferred staying in the background, speaking only when needed, and letting his actions carry the weight of who he was. Dad worked long hours at different jobs just to keep our home steady. Some days he left before sunrise and returned after dark, but he never once complained. He never made me feel like I was a burden. Instead, he made our life feel safe, even when money was tight or days were hard. He taught me to treat people with respect, to listen more than I talked, and to stay grounded no matter what others said. His quiet nature wasn't weakness. It was strength built over years of handling everything on his own. People often overlooked him because he didn't dress fancy or push himself forward. But I knew the depth of his character better than anyone. Growing up with him shaped the way I saw the world. I learned that pride doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from the way you carry yourself through challenges. Even when others ignored him or underestimated him, he never changed who he was. Because of him, I grew up feeling grateful instead of lacking. He made sure I understood the value of kindness, responsibility, and holding your head high quietly. I didn't realize then how important his calm presence would be later in my life. But everything he taught me became the foundation of the strength I would need in the years ahead. I first met Grant Halden at a small community fundraiser my friend dragged me to. He stood out right away, confident posture, steady voice, and a calm sort of charm that made people turn toward him without him trying. He introduced himself with an easy smile, and from the start, he spoke to me as if he genuinely wanted to know who I was, not just make conversation. We began talking more after that night, meeting for coffee, taking evening walks, and learning small details about each other's lives. Grant lived comfortably, came from a family with influence, and carried himself like someone who had always known stability. Being around him felt different from anything I had experienced before, but not in a way that intimidated me. He made an effort to be present, to listen, and to make space for me in his world. As months passed, our relationship moved forward naturally. He showed up when he said he would, asked thoughtful questions, and treated me with a kindness that felt steady rather than showy. I found myself trusting him almost too easily because he never gave me a reason not to. When I met his parents for the first time, they greeted me with perfect politeness. Their smiles were practiced, their voices smooth, and their manners sharp. Nothing was openly unkind, yet something about their careful tone felt like they were keeping a measured distance. They asked about my life, but their eyes drifted away before I finished my sentences. I couldn't explain it at the time, but their warmth never quite reached their expressions. Still, Grant seemed genuine, and the gap between his sincerity and his parents' formal behavior didn't feel like a warning then. It simply felt like two different worlds I was beginning to step between, one that welcomed me easily, and one that held back just enough for me to notice. The more time I spent around Marlon and Livia Halden, the clearer it became that their politeness was only a surface act. At first, their comments were light, almost disguised as harmless curiosity. But as visits became more frequent, their tone shifted in ways that were impossible for me to ignore. It began with questions that sounded innocent but carried a quiet edge. Livia would ask where I learned to manage with so little, or she'd smile and remark that it must have been interesting growing up without many advantages. She never said it harshly, but the message was always there: my world didn't measure up to theirs. Marlon wasn't much better. He often nodded along when I spoke, then followed with comments about how Grant had been raised to expect a certain standard. He liked to mention the circles their family moved in, the expectations set for their son, and how important it was that Grant's future stayed aligned with their values. He never said I wasn't part of that vision, but the implication hovered in every sentence. During dinners, they praised Grant's achievements in a way that felt like they were drawing a line between his life and mine. If I mentioned anything from my past, Livia would tilt her head and say things like, "That must be quite different from what Grant is used to." If I talked about my work, Marlon would quickly shift to discussing careers he believed were more fitting for the Halden family. They never raised their voices or spoke directly against me. Instead, they used thinly veiled remarks that kept reminding me of the gap they believed existed between us. Each comment left a small mark, subtle, but unmistakable, warning me that they viewed me as someone stepping into a place I didn't belong. My dad agreed to join me for a dinner at the Haldens' home, a dinner I hoped would ease the growing tension between our families. He arrived on time, wearing the same neat shirt he always saved for important moments. He looked calm, but I could tell he felt out of place in their polished dining room. From the moment we sat down, the tone was wrong. Marlon examined my dad's jacket with a quick glance that said more than any words. Livia asked if he had trouble finding the house, as if he had never visited a neighborhood like theirs. They spoke softly, but every remark carried a small sting. They asked about his work, though not with real interest. Each question sounded like they were trying to confirm what they already believed. When he answered, they offered short nods and moved on without acknowledging anything he said. At one point, Marlon joked about how some people prefer simple roles, looking directly at my dad as he lifted his glass. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was enough. My father didn't react. He kept his posture steady, ate politely, and avoided engaging in anything that pushed him into uncomfortable territory. He wasn't embarrassed, he simply refused to give them the reaction they were searching for. But while he stayed composed, I noticed something new in his eyes, something I had never seen in him before. There was a tightness there, a quiet hurt that he tried to hide behind a small smile. It wasn't anger. It wasn't shock. It was a mix of disappointment and an effort to hold himself back. He wasn't used to being spoken to that way, not because of pride, but because he believed people should treat others with basic decency. The whole evening left a heavy feeling between us, one I couldn't quite shake as we drove home. The week leading up to the wedding should have been filled with excitement, but instead, it felt like walking through a field of unwanted pressure. Every detail that involved my father seemed to become a problem for Livia. She questioned his place in the ceremony with a forced smile, then suggested adjustments that slowly pushed him out of moments that mattered. She approached me during a final planning meeting and said it would be more appropriate if someone else walked me down the aisle, someone who matched the overall image. The way she said it made her meaning unmistakable. She insisted the photos would look more balanced without my dad in them. I tried to stay calm, but each suggestion chipped away at the joy I had been holding onto. When I brought it up to Grant, hoping he would stand beside me, his reaction felt dismissive. He rubbed his forehead, said his mother was only trying to create a polished event, and asked me not to make it a bigger issue than it needed to be. I stared at him, waiting for him to recognize how low her comments were. Instead, he said that questioning her decisions would create tension on both sides. It was the first moment when doubt settled heavily in my chest. I tried to explain why removing my dad from important roles was hurtful, but Grant only repeated that his mother had a clear vision for the ceremony. His voice stayed soft, but he didn't back away from her choices. The more he defended her, the more I wondered if I would ever be able to rely on him when it truly mattered. By midweek, I felt caught between protecting my father's dignity and trying not to start an argument with the family I was marrying into. The closer the wedding came, the harder it became to ignore the unease building inside me. The morning of the ceremony felt heavy even before anything went wrong. People filled the venue, flowers were being adjusted, music tested, and everyone moved with rushed excitement. I was standing near the entrance, trying to steady my breathing, when I heard Livia's voice carry through a cluster of guests gathered near the hallway. She wasn't whispering the way someone does when they want to stay hidden. Her words were clear enough for anyone standing nearby to catch them. She said my father was garbage and that he was lucky someone like us even allows him in the room. She laughed lightly afterward, as if it were nothing more than a casual remark. The sound of her voice hit me like a physical blow. My stomach tightened, and the air around me felt thin. I couldn't move at first. I just stood there, stunned, unable to believe she chose that moment, minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, to tear into the one person who had stood by me my entire life. I felt heat rise behind my eyes, not from anger at first, but from hurt so sharp it made my chest ache. I turned my head and saw my dad standing a few feet away, adjusting his cuff with that familiar calm he always carried. He must have sensed something in my expression because he walked toward me with steady steps. I didn't say anything, I didn't have to. He read it all in my face. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, the same gesture he used when I was a child and couldn't find the right words. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need an explanation. Instead, he leaned close and spoke quietly, "Just for me, let's just get through today." His voice was steady, but behind it, I heard something deeper: acceptance, patience, and a kind of strength that held me up when my own was slipping. Despite the pain in my chest, his calm presence kept me standing as the ceremony drew closer. The reception was supposed to feel like a celebration, but the atmosphere around me felt strained from the moment we stepped inside. People talked, glasses clinked, and music filled the room, yet I couldn't shake the tightness sitting in my chest. I tried to focus on the smiles, the lights, the cake waiting to be cut, but none of it settled the unease lingering from earlier. My dad sat at a table near the back, keeping to himself the way he always did in crowded spaces. He wasn't trying to draw attention, just quietly observing the room. I was watching him when I heard a burst of laughter from a nearby group. Marlon stood among them, holding his drink high, telling a story with far too much enthusiasm. Then he said it, loud enough for several tables to hear. He joked that my dad probably smelled the money and crawled out of wherever he works. The guests around him laughed without hesitation, as if he had said something clever. The sound cut through me in a way I couldn't ignore. The humiliation, the disrespect, the constant digs, they all stacked on top of each other until something inside me finally snapped. I walked away from the crowd and found Grant standing near the bar, talking with a cousin. I pulled him aside and told him exactly what his father had said. My voice shook, not from fear but from the weight of everything I had been holding in. Grant sighed and rubbed his temples, as if I were creating a problem out of thin air. He said his father was just trying to be funny, that I needed to stop taking everything so seriously, and that confronting them would make things worse. He didn't show anger toward their behavior, only frustration with my reaction. In that moment, something inside me hollowed out. I didn't feel protected. I didn't feel supported. I felt alone, standing beside a man who wouldn't defend me or the person who had raised me. The moment hung heavy in the air. I was still trying to compose myself when I noticed my dad rise from his seat near the back. He walked toward the stage with steady, unhurried steps. Most people didn't even notice him at first. He moved with the same quiet presence he carried everywhere. But when he reached the microphone and tapped it gently, the soft sound echoed through the room. Conversations faded. Chairs shifted. The music lowered. Within seconds, every guest turned toward him. He began by thanking everyone for being there to share the day with us. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried with a calm strength that drew the room in. He spoke about how proud he was to see his daughter begin a new chapter, how he had watched me grow into someone thoughtful, strong, and full of heart. Each word landed softly, but it held a warmth that filled the space. People listened politely at first, expecting nothing more than a simple toast. Even the Haldens smiled stiffly, though their eyes stayed sharp, waiting for him to finish. But then my dad shifted slightly, resting one hand on the microphone stand, and his tone changed just enough to command every bit of attention in the room. He said he had never planned to speak about himself that day. He preferred to stay in the background. But after everything he had witnessed, he felt it was time to share something the room didn't know. He paused, letting the silence settle. Then he revealed that for years, he had been the majority shareholder of Halden Industrial Solutions, the same company the Halden family often described as their legacy, their pride, their history. He explained that he had stepped in during a difficult period for the business and had maintained his ownership quietly out of respect. A wave of shock moved through the guests. Conversations halted mid-sentence. The Haldens' expressions froze in place, their confidence draining instantly. My dad stood there calmly, not boasting, not gloating, just stating the truth. With the dignity they had refused to show him. The room went completely still. Guests who had been chatting moments ago froze in place, their attention fixed entirely on my father. Even the servers paused mid-step, unsure if they should continue. Eyes widened, mouths slightly open, whispers dying before they began. Every person present felt the sudden weight of his words. My dad's expression stayed calm, composed, yet there was a firmness in his voice that carried undeniable authority. He explained that years ago, when the company faced serious trouble, he had quietly acquired controlling shares. He wanted the business to survive, and he had allowed the Haldens to run daily operations, preserving their status and reputation while keeping his involvement secret. He made it clear that his silence had never been weakness. It had been a choice, a deliberate decision to support them without demanding recognition. But today was different. Today, he could no longer ignore the repeated slights, the whispered insults, and the cruel remarks directed at me. He looked at them calmly but without compromise and stated that the disrespect toward his daughter, the one person he had always protected, would no longer be tolerated. He was done allowing anyone to undermine her worth, including the people who claimed to be family. The Haldens' faces shifted from surprise to shock. Livia's lips pressed tightly together. Marlon's jaw tightened, and their usual composed demeanor cracked under the realization that the power they had assumed was gone. The entire room felt the tension shift as my father, once quiet and reserved, now held every eye on him. For the first time, the dynamic had changed. Respect was demanded, and it was clear that no one present would forget this moment. Marlon and Livia looked like the air had been knocked out of them. Their confident masks crumbled instantly, leaving only panic and disbelief. Their eyes darted around the room, searching for support, but there was none. The guests who had been murmuring nervously now exchanged glances, realizing that the quiet man they had underestimated held the real power. My dad took a slow breath and continued. He explained that changes would take place immediately. Leadership positions within the company would be restructured, and decisions would no longer be made behind closed doors. The authority they had relied on for years was shifting, and the shift was final. He then addressed Marlon directly, informing him that he would be stepping down from his role. Marlon's face turned pale, lips trembling, and for the first time, he seemed small and uncertain. Livia's hands clenched at her sides, but she could not interrupt or challenge what had been announced. The quiet control my father had maintained for years was now visible to everyone in the room. Grant stood frozen, unable to form words. His face was a mixture of shock and regret. When he finally managed to speak, he muttered apologies, but they were empty, too late to undo the humiliation and the truth that had been revealed. The weight of the situation was clear. My father had outmaneuvered them completely without anger or drama, simply with facts and authority. Guests whispered among themselves, some in disbelief, others in admiration. The Haldens, once the center of attention and power, were now the ones shrinking in their own home. It was a complete reversal, and my father's calm, deliberate actions ensured that everyone witnessed their fall from control. The room would never see them the same way again. After everything that had happened, I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Grant had failed to defend me when it mattered most. His hesitation, his unwillingness to challenge his parents, revealed where his loyalties truly lay. The realization hit me hard. I had been standing beside someone who would not stand beside me. I spent the next few days thinking through my options, weighing the embarrassment, the disappointment, and the future I wanted for myself. The excitement and hope I had once felt for the marriage now felt like a distant memory, replaced by clarity and resolve. I knew I couldn't continue on a path where respect and support were missing. With my father's quiet guidance, I made my decision. I began the process to annul the wedding, moving carefully but decisively. Dale never questioned me or tried to dissuade me. Instead, he offered steady encouragement, reminding me that strength isn't about enduring someone's disrespect, it's about walking away from it. He assured me that I deserved a life where my partner would protect and value me, not remain silent while I was hurt. The act of annulling the marriage was both terrifying and liberating. I felt the weight lift from my shoulders as I took control of my own life. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settling in. It wasn't revenge or anger that guided me, it was the understanding that I had the right to choose someone who would stand beside me in all ways, not merely follow the shadow of their family. Through it all, my father stayed close, a calm anchor in the storm, reinforcing that his presence and belief in me mattered more than anyone else's approval. His support made the decision feel not just right, but necessary. Months passed, and life began to settle into a new rhythm. The Haldens' influence dwindled quickly. Without control of the company and stripped of the power they had long relied on, their lavish lifestyle started to crumble. Rumors spread among clients and partners, and their former confidence gave way to uncertainty. People who once respected their name now hesitated, and the world they had taken for granted no longer recognized them as leaders. Meanwhile, my father stepped fully into his role, guiding the company with integrity and fairness. He made decisions rooted in honesty, valuing employees and clients over personal gain. The business flourished in ways it never had under the Haldens' management, proving that quiet dedication and competence often surpass arrogance and inherited privilege. I watched all of this unfold with a mixture of awe and relief. My heart felt lighter each day, free from the tension that had shadowed my wedding and early marriage. Seeing my father operate with calm authority, untouched by ego or vengeance, showed me what true strength looked like. It wasn't in loud declarations or punishment, it was in consistent, principled action that spoke louder than any words. I also learned something about myself. I had survived betrayal and disappointment, and I had chosen a path that honored both my dignity and my father's legacy. The quiet victory gave me peace, and I vowed never to allow anyone to belittle or underestimate him again. The lessons from those months stayed with me: strength often hides in silence, and the real power lies in protecting those you love while standing firmly on your own principles. In the end, the world recognized my father's worth, and I finally understood that his unwavering support and quiet wisdom had always been our greatest inheritance.